Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are dialing in or listening to this from. My name is Celine Floyd. I'm one of the directors of Capfinity's talent practice, and here we are at episode 32 of Lead Strong, looking at a really interesting topic today, accountable leadership. So can't wait to get into that conversation. Just a couple of quick words about Capfinity. We are a company that specialises in strengths-based assessment and development. We have a talent acquisition and a talent management arm of our business, so we support organisations end-to-end with their entire people agenda. And we have offices in the UK, Ireland, Australia and America, currently serving about 250 clients out of 80 countries. Steph, welcome. Hello.
Hi, Celine. Really looking forward to today. Brilliant to have Davina and Rebecca with us today, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in a sec. Like Celine, I'm one of the directors of the talent practice at Capfinity. We work together, not just on Lead Strong, but on quite a lot of client projects as well. And I'm really thrilled that we've got Davina and Rebecca here. So I'm going to ask you ladies to introduce yourselves, if that's okay. And perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about your career to date, and then why you are passionate about the subject of leadership. Let me come to Rebecca first of all. So Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you, Steph. Hello, everybody. So my name's Rebecca Carlin, and I currently work for the Leicestershire and Rutland Integrated Care Board, which is part of the NHS as an organisational development and workforce manager. And I've worked in the NHS for the last 9 years, mainly in organisational development. Prior to this, I worked in logistics for most of my career in a learning and development capacity. And I'm really passionate about leadership, because I just believe that our leaders play such an important part in setting the tone and the culture and the way we work.
So true, so true. Thank you, Rebecca. And over to you, Davina. Something similar in terms of a flavour of your career, and then also why you're passionate about the subject of leadership.
Yeah, and I guess for me they sort of go hand in hand in terms of where my career started and so. But yes, I'm head of learning at Skyscanner, so we're a leading global travel site, and of course the role is about growing our people and helping them to be their best and do their best. And the thing that I love about Skyscanner is that it's all about pace, it's all about passion, purpose, and of course people. And I was thinking about my career and how sometimes you can take that for granted in organisations you work, and that one of the first roles that I had was actually at an innovation practice called What If. And I was at a reunion party with them recently and reminded myself about all of those elements of passion and purpose and people. And I think that's where I kind of first captured my thirst around learning and observing teams and leaders, because I was fortunate enough to be in a role where we took leaders from large multinationals and got them to look at companies that were innovative in either customer service or product or brand innovation. And you could see from those leaders just what it was like to inspire and to lead. So that really ignited my thirst for observing and for learning, and then went on to senior roles in Mind Gym and Expedia, but yeah, like I say, it's sort of that's what ignited the passion, because you can see that where you've got leaders that have got that enthusiasm, where they encourage that passion, where they can have a strong sense of purpose, you can see how that engages workforces and then helps them to do great things and to thrive.
Amazing. Oh, thank you both. Fascinating to hear about your different industries, but as we always find a lot of commonality in terms of how you arrived in the roles that you are. And yeah, can't wait to hear your insights into this topic today, which, as I said at the beginning, is all around accountable leadership. And accountability is one of the 8 strengths that we have in our leadership model, our altitude model, and that model was born out of a big piece of meta-analysis work that we did a couple of years ago, and where we were looking at what makes people successful across different industries and across different organisations, and accountability came through as one of the top ones. And in our model, it's defined as this focus on execution and on results and outputs, delivering on promises and honouring commitments. There's a piece around problem solving there, and there's a piece around risk management. And it's really interesting because when we share that with organisations and with clients, even I will say it's like the least sexy one of the 8. Like it's the one that's, you know, like, oh, people tend to gloss over. So it's been really interesting for us in preparation for this session to just do a bit of digging around into the research, because we know it's important, but it was good to see it kind of emphasised elsewhere. And there was a McKinsey report which was fascinating. I was just going to look at my notes so I make sure I get the stats right. So they did a huge piece of research looking at the success of different organisations and the contribution of leadership in that success. And what they found was that there were only 4 kinds of leadership behaviour that was accounting for 89% of leadership effectiveness. So essentially 4 key leadership traits being really important. And 2 of those are related to accountability. So one was having a strong results focus, and the second was solving problems effectively. And actually those 2 being the cornerstones of then, you know, what essentially made those successful organisations be successful. And we've done a couple of sessions, these episodes lately, looking at things like sustainability and courage, which is another one of our leadership strengths. And it got me thinking about what it means to be an accountable leader in terms of the planet and society. And I think that's an interesting trend to bring in here. And another piece that we found, which was interesting, was just about Sheryl Sandberg. Obviously, she's like left Google and Facebook after 14 years. And there was a reporter, which I think coined perfectly kind of her contribution to that organization. So this reporter said, she will go down in history for her extraordinary success in growing Google and Facebook and her failure to deal with the costs of that success. And what it made me really reflect on was that you can't have strategic vision, can you, without having accountability as well? It's like a foundational thing to all the other leadership behaviours. So not sexy, but really, really, really important, I think, is what I will say to open this session. And really keen then to understand in your views both and in your experience, you know, why you've seen and why you think accountability and this ability to consider risks, you know, why is it such a crucial leadership strength for leaders to have? And I'll come back to Rebecca again in the first instance. Rebecca, what's your view on that?
I think we can make this a bit more sexy, can't we? I don't think it has to be that dull. I think in reality, it's how we play that out, isn't it, to people within our organisations who we work for, you know, and us as leaders. Because for me, knowing what the expectations are for me, for my teams in whichever industry that I've worked in, and then knowing what I've got to be able to deliver, what the goals are, and taking some ownership, some accountability for those things is vital, and everybody has a part to play. So I think it is key to success in whichever industry that I've worked in, and I've worked in a variety of different organisations. But actually, when there's not accountability, things don't get delivered. We don't meet the goals. You know, it's all a bit vague. So I think being able to be really clear, and links back to what Davina said about having that purpose and that vision and knowing it. I think these things can't be seen in isolation. They're skills that are needed, you know, for leaders across all of our, you know, sectors. And I think for me, being able to share those stories of when, you know, you can hold your hand up and say this has gone really well, or actually this hasn't worked. And I think we need to do more of that as well. We've been accountable for something, but it didn't go as planned, but we've learned something from it. And that thing leads into the risks as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. And for me, when you're the first part of what you were saying there was a real theme around clarity, wasn't there? And I think so much of what everyone's trying to navigate these days is so ambiguous that actually any clarity that you can add in is important. And yeah, absolutely, this notion of engendering cultures where it feels safe enough to voice what hasn't gone well, I think is a really interesting dynamic of that. Davina, does that concur with your kind of thinking?
Yeah, it does in a number of ways. I was just thinking of something I read with Ariana Huffington saying, that failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of success. And so that element of, being able to learn from those is really important. And I think that element of trust is really big in terms of accountability as well. I was thinking about it, and just in terms of how much change there is and how much ambiguity there is, and what resilience and, as you say, Rebecca, bravery and courage there's needed. That I think that accountability lends itself into those factors as well, because then the role of a leader is really to be able to look around corners, to be on the ball and look around corners and to see what's coming, and therefore being able to navigate people and being conscious of decisions that are being made or how you are taking people forward. And I remember talking to somebody who was the skipper of a sailing boat. They were going to be in a race, and the rest of the crew were all amateurs. So on purpose, the role was to skill them up and then sail halfway around the world. But he was saying to me that when he was doing that, they were doing quite well in the race, but then they heard that a storm was coming, and he'd said that they make the decision: do we divert around the storm and actually fall back in the position that we are at, or do we go through the storm and that can give us an advantage because others are likely to not do that. And he consulted with this group. They're amateurs, so he's building trust in them, he's building their confidence. So on my first sail, I'm going to go into the storm, but I think that it was the element of accountability. From the way that he was telling the story, it was the element of accountability for making it okay for people to feel confident in making decisions and taking actions that he would then support. That meant that actually they all went, yes, we'll go for it. And hair raising as it was, they were able to get through it and did put them ahead of the race. So to me, I think that element of trust really comes out in that story, and how that then means that people will be more likely to follow if they understand that, okay, somebody's got my back in this, somebody will help me if I get stuck, and be able to see where the learnings are if we do get stuck, but also celebrate and champion me when things go well.
Yeah, I love that story. Wow, that sounds like an incredible journey. Yeah, and I think we see that, don't we, that if people are clear on what their role, it's this clarity again, isn't it? It's in what way am I contributing to the decisions that are being made? What's the noise level of my voice, and what's the influence that I have? Which is really important. And you've made when you were speaking, I was reflecting on which I've referenced a few times when we did an episode, Rebecca, looking at the NHS and leadership in the NHS, and one of the NHS leaders there said, I think the question was, how was it being a leader in the pandemic? And they were like, it was the easiest time to be a leader because everyone was focused on actually execution and doing things and navigating it, and and I think sometimes that can be lost, can't it, when you're not in a kind of crisis mode. It feels like maybe there's these other things that you have to focus on, and actually it's about the essentials, getting the essentials right. So yeah, really interesting.
I was thinking about Alex, who's our CEO, and he always talks about using pre-mortem as a technique to weigh up risk. So rather than doing a post-mortem afterwards, think in advance, what would you learn if you took that decision or if you went that way? And I know that's one of his favourite ways of sort of thinking things through, which, is definitely useful here. So I guess moving us on a little bit, we know that if leaders kind of over-rely on this strength, research shows that there are dangers in that they could lack agility, and agility is the word, isn't it, of the last few years, and they might find it hard to pivot when needed, which whether you're in the NHS or Skyscanner or anywhere else, seems to now be absolutely fundamental to leading in the 21st century. Sometimes I guess they can become a bit too committed to a plan when things have kind of moved on, and then become quite risk averse, I suppose, and held back by a sort of a fear of failure. So I guess leaders who are great at accountability, ensuring they use that strength appropriately and they don't overplay it. What do you think they can do to ensure they're not overusing it? And I'll come to Davina for this. And have you got any examples, Davina, of where you feel leaders have got this balance right that you've experienced?
It's interesting in terms of, where not to overuse it, and that kind of actually you can do the opposite in terms of that being risk averse as a result of it. So I guess, one of the things that we have been experimenting with that tries to overcome this is an introduction to something called commitments. And it is instead of setting objectives that you would usually do, and you tend to do those in isolation, don't you? And then it's you that's accountable for the delivery of them. We've sort of opened that up across the organisation to say, actually, if there's something that I'm committing to delivering, it's not just me that's going to be delivering it. It's you, and it's you, and it's you, and it's you. So actually, we need to do not quite a pre-mortem, but we need to do some agreement setting beforehand about where are we able to be for each other, and how can we support, and is it on my agenda as well as your agenda? And so getting commitment from those that are going to deliver mean that you're able to stay more on track, but also you need to be more agile than in flexing with things that change all the time. But the difference with commitments and having that almost handshake with people is that if those changes do happen, then I also need to tell you, and you need to tell me about those changes, so that we can all move together, and it's not one person trying to move in isolation and another trying to do something different, which then creates some tension and opportunity for failure. So like I say, we're experimenting with this, and and it really does create a really good conversation amongst leaders to get that agreement and know how to work through those challenging times, or when other opportunities come up as well.
Yeah, that's how often do you review those commitments, Davina?
We try to review them at least quarterly, but a lot of people do review them frequently, and a lot of people use them before going into conversations, before going into a meeting with an individual. Let me look at, because they're public to people across the business. I can see what your commitments are, so I can go in and have a look and work out, right, well, how does that relate to what I need to do? And so they're reviewed frequently.
I love that transparency with goals. I've always tried to do that with my team, because I think it's so helpful to be able to see actually partly what's motivating someone else, and how then you can align and come closer together. That's great. So Rebecca, overusing accountability, ensuring that people use this strength appropriately. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I love the idea of the commitment, so I'm going to take that, pinch that with pride, and maybe connecting with you beyond this, Davina, because I think what you said definitely kind of resonates with me, that, regular review of things. I think that for me is key, that, we don't just say this is what you're accountable for and then we leave it for 12 months. The world doesn't work like that, and the landscape is changing daily. So I think that review, we're not as formalized as you in our way of working at the moment, but we do have objectives and things like that. I think the people that I see that do it well and don't overuse it are the ones that are quite open, transparent, all the things that we've spoke about already. Actually the trust, they trust you to get on and do things, they check in with you, you've got that safety that if you're not sure you can ask. So I think for me that they're the things that are quite important, and like with most of these things in the series that you've been doing, they're also interlinked, aren't they? They're not in isolation. So at times we might play on this strength more than others, but I think it's really important that we recognize, we take some accountability where it's needed. The risk bit and the barriers, I think being brave, going back to the brave and the courage, I think is really important, as long as it's safe to do so, obviously. And getting a diverse group of people together, which is kind of what I liked your commitments bit, because actually if everyone can see that, you know, I might look at yours and think, well, I could support that, or actually that's moved on now and we could connect in. So I think there's some great things, Davina, that it sounds like you're doing.
And I'm thinking about the something we've done on one of our leadership programs where we talk about selective, like being selective in your leadership in terms of the things that you choose to focus on. Because actually one of the biggest problems I think leaders have is we've just got so much everyone's responsible for, and we're trying to move, every organisation seems to be moving too many things forward simultaneously. That just seems to be the way of the world. I think technology has sort of enabled us to think we can do everything. And I think it's like, if you can be selective and know I'm really going to deliver that and really get it right and be accountable for it, I think there's a kind of relationship there for me.
And I think, you know, building on that, Steph, I think sometimes as a leader, you have got to be brave and say, look, right now, I'm accountable for this piece of work. This is taking up all of my team's time, and actually I can't take on these other bits of work. And that can feel really quite uncomfortable for some people. But in my experience, when you do that, most people understand. You know, I'm not saying I can never do it. I'm just saying, right at this moment in time, the team or, you know, myself, the focus is this. So and it's feeling safe, feeling brave, and, you know, being in, having the people around you to support those things. Because I think if you can have those conversations, and it might mean that actually you have to realign things and, you know, move things around, but I think those conversations are really important, because technology has helped us in lots of ways, but, you know, there's many people that are just working a lot longer hours, you know, from home, never switching off, you know, and that's not good for our well-being.
I saw an interesting article recently, Rebecca, that showed that there is a gender difference in what you just described, which I thought was fascinating, in that women tend to not be as good at saying, I've got enough on my plate, thanks, I can't take any more on. Yeah, which I thought was really fascinating. And I'm reflecting on some of the leaders that I've worked with in a more one-to-one capacity, and actually that's quite a good skill, I think, to learn, to be able to have that confidence to say, actually, this is what I'm working on, and this is what I'm going to be, this is how my contribution is going to be reviewed in a month's time. So this is what I need to, you know, to really dedicate myself to. And when you were asking the question there, Steph, I know we were looking at, you know, how you can lose agility. And there's another piece of research which I read a couple of months ago that showed that people who are good at being accountable and good at execution are the same people that don't tend to be so good at the strategic vision, and vice versa. So if you are kind of a big picture strategic thinker, you tend to not be so good at the accountability. And I guess then the skill becomes one of self-awareness, doesn't it? You know, actually being aware of when you need to downplay your natural strength in one or the other, and dial up the other. So I think that unfolds in reality, doesn't it, sometimes? Okay, all right, lovely. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I think, as we've described and as we've talked about, you know, accountability is one of those foundational leadership behaviours and characteristics that is really important for getting things done. And there were some key themes that emerged for me, I think, from the conversation. One was around clarity, and, you know, being accountable is wrapped up in giving clarity to yourself and to other people, and how where there is a lot of ambiguity and a lot of volatility, that is perhaps more important than ever. We spoke about trust and and looked at, you know, some of the psychological safety concepts actually around creating a culture where you feel safe enough to talk about failure and, you know, what's not going so well, and that being an important part of accountability. And then more recently, we talked about actual kind of practical examples and tips for people to get this balance right, so that you can be accountable, but it doesn't mean that you're not agile and you're not being strategic. And Davina gave that great example of commitments, which I think we're all going to take away around sharing commitments with each other. So lots of good content there and lots of good tips. I wonder if I may just come to each of you in turn for some final kind of reflections and parting words on what we've covered. I'll come to Davina first.
Yeah, I guess that it's what you would expect in terms of the behaviours of leaders really influence how others feel, and in order to demonstrate accountability and to be accountable, it is about like you say, creating that environment of trust for people to be able to speak, for the transparency, and that actually through doing that, through demonstrating that, it creates confidence and conviction, which then has that absolute knock-on effect in terms of engagement and performance of people, which is just essential to be able to, you know, retain talent and to grow talent.
Encouraging conviction, perfect, thank you. And Rebecca?
I think building on that as well is, you know, sharing those stories that you've got as a leader of those things that have gone really well and those things that have not gone so well, but what you've learned from those. I think for me that would be the key things.
Wonderful, thank you. And Steph?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on that Harvey Coleman research that talks about how our brand is made up of our performance, our image, and our exposure. And people are always shocked that exposure is 60%, image is 30%, and performance is 10%. And especially when I've worked with graduates, they all go, "Oh, right, okay, so we don't have to worry about what we do at all." And you go, no. There's no point having exposure if you haven't delivered something. Like, and that's it, isn't it? And I guess the key is that we need to deliver, we need to be accountable, and that is really important, because if we don't, people won't be confident in our ability. And so we must never forget how important it is to ensure that we do deliver. I don't know if you've noticed, Celine, there's lots of global viewers for this episode today. So hello to everybody globally who's watching.
Yeah, hello everyone, that's lovely. Yeah, perfect. So I think that's right, and that echoes all the things that I was struck by in our conversation. And I think, as always, self-awareness and knowing where your strengths are is really key, because as we were saying just now, you know, if you're someone who's really good at accountability, it is more likely that you will be less good at the kind of agility, strategic vision, and then vice versa. And I think, you know, feeling like that's okay is a good thing. Knowing ourselves and knowing our strengths and being able to flex is really important. So thank you so much, Rebecca and Davina, for joining us for the conversation. As always, I feel like we could go on for hours just talking. But we must finish up now. Thank you, Steph, co-host, for facilitating episode 32. We are back for episode 33 in 2 weeks' time. And I believe we're looking at strategic vision, actually, which we've touched upon today already. So that will be really interesting. And I'm sure we will pull on some of the content we've referenced here around how do you achieve both. But in the meantime, yeah, hello to all our global viewers. What a treat to have you all join us. And the full episode will be available to download later. Thank you again to the three of you, to everyone that's listened, and enjoy the rest of your days and evenings, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.